All right, hey, welcome. This is April 3rd, and this is lecture 3. This will be our last lecture for the day. So we started off the conversation about finding meaning, right? And where do we find that meaning? The original thought was it could be found in sort of historic reconstruction, getting behind the author, trying to understand the author, and from that, if we can understand what it meant, we can understand what it means. And then there was this shift when we began to question or call into question the objectivity of historical analysis and really our proximity to history or our accessibility to history. The shift then went from if we can get a sense of what it meant, we can know what it means or what once was, to what we have, which is the text itself. So the text takes on its own sense of life, right? But both of those are sort of rooted in this belief that meaning is fixed. Fixed either in the thing back there or fixed in the thing right here. And so in that, there still is an assumption of fixed meaning. However, as we move into the 20th century and move through the 20th century, even that suggestion is going to be called into question, suggesting that perhaps meaning in of itself isn't exactly fixed, that meaning is transitional or always changing, right? Throughout the 20th century, there's this allure that meaning as a static project is gradually abandoned. In fact, there is the sense that there is only ever meanings, and that suggesting that the word meaning, or when someone says it means this, that is an act of power or a construct, and that is always a construct of the reader. So what the 20th century wants to suggest is that we can't just simply talk about what a thing means. You can only talk about what it means to the reader. And that all meaning is a construct of the reader. So we're not even concerned about necessarily what the author meant in the first place, because what the author meant is completely inconsequential. It's only about what it means to the reader. So there's some things that begin to give way in this process. Subjectivity over objectivity. Remember we talked about we want to be objective interpreters of the text, setting aside our biases. Well, the 20th century and postmodernity or deconstructionism wants to suggest that objectivity is a myth, that we're only ever rooted in our subjectivity, in our life as we know it. So you can't separate who you are, how you've grown up, your biases, the perspectives that you bring, the baggage that you bring, from the way in which you interpret things. In fact, it'll be all of that will construct your desire for meaning in the first place and shape how something means what it means. That it's a sense that what we're doing is constructing meaning versus recovering meaning. That's one of the shifts. It's a shift from what we once would have said a stable meaning to meaning is relative. So relativity it's over stability. From how a text is used instead of what was intended in that text. So it's really about the appropriation of that text into the life of a community rather than the intention of an author in the way it was written for the community. And then meanings, what it means to rather than what it meant for. Okay? So what it means to the reader rather than what it meant for the reader. That these are all the shifts that you can see on your slides that are necessary for us to understand in terms of the kind of dynamics that are involved in this world in front of the text. Reading the text through lenses confessionally, right? So instead of attempting to suspend our biases in social locations, it might be that our biases in social locations can give a person a better perspective or construct a better, more adequate meaning from the text. So, and we'll see this when we talk about post-colonial criticism, which we're going to talk about in just a few moments. And then there's also the recognition that our theological and doctrinal commitments are already shaping our engagement to the text. That, again, is something vitally important in this process, is that we are already keenly shaped by our theological assumptions even before we enter into the text. So we're reading a text through the lens of our theological traditions, and that ultimately impacts how that text is to be understood or read. Now, if you continue to go down with me to the next slide, I want to break down this world in front of the text a little bit. So there's just a few, and I'm just going to delineate. There's many different worlds in front of the text, and the implications of when we begin to call into question stable meaning versus relative meaning, the impact on that, the discourse on deconstructionism, which is deconstructing any form of power that might a challenge, or might suggest that it can arrive at some sort of meaning. The first criticism that I want to talk about is what's called post-colonial criticism. It's reading the scriptures in light of the oppression at the hands of Western Eurocentric white male hegemony. So basically suggesting that most scriptural interpretation has happened. Sorry, I've got to pause. This is my dog who we talk about all the time. Isn't he adorable? Rudy, look right there. Look right there. Say hi to everybody. Hi, everybody. Yes, I'm that guy. Okay, so I got to put you down. All right. See what I mean? I told you. I told y'all. So post-colonial criticism. Reading the scriptures in light of the oppression of the hands of the Western Eurocentric white male hegemony. This belief that most of our biblical interpretation and scriptural usages come at the hands of white Eurocentric males, right? And so there's the assumptions that maybe that position of power and privilege has skewed the way in which we understand scriptural meaning. And so perhaps we need to dislocate scripture from the hands of the powerful and privileged and put it in the hands of those who are on the margins or oppressed, because much of the literature of the scripture is written by marginalized and peripheral communities. And so we see this in terms of liberation theology within Latin America, black liberation theology. We see this in gender studies, ethnic, LGBTQIA, the assumption of reading scripture through the lens of as the oppressed who are seeking to use the text in terms of calling into question power and privilege and oppression. The next one is called reader response criticism. This is basically the reading of a text is marked by multiple readings by multiple people in multiple contexts, and that's really dependent on the reader themselves. But it's instead of just simply communicating information, the text is in essence a script that is to be performed, and that performance will be based upon the context. So it's going to mean things differently in different communities, in different contexts. So we can't necessarily speak about what it means. We have to speak about what it means to groups of people who are forged through a different set of experiences and environments. And then the last one I want to talk about is what we call feminist criticism. And I've got a picture there of Elizabeth Schussler Fiorenza, who's been an incredible feminist theologian, and she's done amazing work. But it's a recognition that much of what is found in Scripture takes a patriarchal nature, and feminist theology and feminist readings of the Bible, biblical hermeneutics, often tries to dislocate inspiration from the writing of the text to putting inspiration as what happens from communities as they engage the text, and it sets them free from the oppressive patriarchal natures into liberation and flourishing. So it's reading the Bible through the lens of a feminist perspective, calling into question patriarchy, recognizing that when we see patriarchy, that is not the work of God, that is the privilege of men, and that the Spirit of God inspires those who subvert those structures of patriarchy and find flourishing and liberation for females in the midst of a male-dominated world. All of that is to say, those are shaped by the world in front of the text, not to mention the theological and doctrinal issues that I as a Wesleyan bring, or some people as a Calvinist bring, or Catholics bring. We all bring our commitments and our theological dogma and doctrine to the text itself. I want to finish up just briefly here, reminding us on Wednesday, I engaged that text of Mark chapter 12 and the parable of the tenants. We asked some questions of the world behind the text. Now I want to just walk through a few of the questions. You can look through these. I think these will be helpful for your exegesis. The world of the text questions: in what ways does the genre of the parable shape the meaning and interpretation of the text? What kind of parable is this? Is it allegorical, ethical? What are the clues within the text that point to the purpose of the text usage? Are there clues about what is intended to do the text, the rhetoric it employs? Like, is it supposed to do something? How does the parable fit within the Mark and Gospel? How does the parable fit within the other with its other uses in other Gospels? How does this text fit within both the New Testament and the overall canon of Scripture? What is the narrative flow of the parable? Is there anything within the narrative flow that would suggest that the dialogue within the text shapes its meaning or indicates the character or the characters in the story? Those are the asking the questions of the text. And I know that I'm going through quickly. I want to give you a chance to read them on your own. We'll make a connection next week to kind of discuss this further. And then the questions in front of the text would be, what theological commitments and doctrines might already presume upon the text a certain kind of meaning that we carry to the text? How have those been theologically conditioned to be read according to the text? In what way is power being used in this text? Someone may actually, does this text point to an unfortunate reduction of all human and divine existence to power over something? So we can talk about how God seems to impose power over those who manage his vineyard. In what ways are the landowner God in this text uses an image of colonial demand upon laborers in the vineyard? Is this just? Might the vineyard workers be the real heroes who in some way refuse the authoritarian demands of the landowner and the presumptuous use of the power of the sun? Is that faithfully way to read this story? How about among those who are often lured into dependency models and then exploited for their work? These are the kind of questions that people in front of the text might ask. What are some of the redemptive ways in which a community of readers might embody or perform this text? These are the kind of questions that would be asked by those in front of the text. Covered a lot of information. I know, I'm so sorry to do this so quickly, but I think this stuff is valuable and we can discuss it further as we lean further into the future. But I wanted to give you some practical implications here at the end of this lecture. Talk to you on Monday.